March 24th was Equal Pay Day. This day symbolizes how far into the year the average woman has to work, in addition to the earnings that they made from last year, in order to earn what the average man made in just the previous year. And this is regardless of experience, industry, job type, education level. And it's even worse for mothers and for women of color. In fact, Equal Pay Day for Black women isn't until August 22nd. For Native women, it's not until September 23rd. And for Latina women, it's not until actually November 20th. So clearly, we have a huge issue in this country with our pay equity, the state of pay equity and the gender wage gap. And therefore, PCADV has released a new report, our pay equity report. And today we have the author of that report joining us for our Ask an Advocate to talk about pay equity, the report and the contents thereof. So today we have Aishwarya Sinha with us. She's a prevention specialist at PCADV, and as I mentioned, author of this new pay equity report. The report discusses the state of the gender wage gap in both the US and Pennsylvania specifically. It explores the connections between the gender wage gap and domestic violence, and it makes recommendations on what we as a community, a state, a country can try to address to reduce the gender wage gap and thus also help reduce the rates of domestic violence. So Aishwarya, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I'd like to get us started by just talking a little bit about what the gender wage gap actually is, and also defining pay equity, since we use both of those terms. We'll use both of those terms today, and we use both of those terms throughout the report.
Sure. So the gender wage gap, or the pay gap, is the difference between men and women's median earnings. It basically shows how much women earn relative to men, and it is generally calculated for year-round full-time workers in the United States. And so just so that we're clear on the data, a woman who works full-time in the United States still earns 82 cents for every dollar earned by a man. And this difference translates to an average loss of $530,000 over the course of a woman's lifetime. And so, as Lauren mentioned, the report talks about pay equity, which is equal pay for work that is equal or similar in value. And oftentimes it includes jobs that require like similar educational level, similar skill level, experience, background, etc.
Great, thanks, Aishwarya. And another one of the terms that I'd like us to define at the beginning here is comparable worth. You mentioned that as well in the report. Can you give us a definition on what that is?
Sure. So comparable worth basically takes into account equal pay for equal work. And through comparable worth, you evaluate the job that a woman is doing and what she's getting paid in comparison to a man doing a similar kind of job.
Great, thank you. And so one of the things that I wanted us to talk about today was how different things affect the gender wage gap, and that it doesn't necessarily go away if a woman has different education, chooses a different industry, that wage gap exists regardless of some of those things. So if you could talk a little bit to that, that'd be great.
Sure. I mean, oftentimes there's a misconception that, women can close the wage gap if they take certain steps like earning an advanced degree or getting a higher paying job. But it's really important to remember that the wage gap is a systematic problem and not an individual's choice. So the wage gap exists irrespective of the industry a woman is employed in, irrespective of like what degree she holds, irrespective of whether they have a child or not. And I can go further and explain. So let's take a look at like the industrial level wage gap. So the wage gap exists in almost every industry, be it healthcare, be it civilian, like even in the higher paying field, there's a higher level of gender discrimination, in the legal field, in the financial field. Most often times women hardly earn like 72 or 71 cents in these fields. And even in like top tier positions in manager level jobs, the hiring and promotion of women are rare. And when it comes to like any industry, even in occupations they dominate, like academics, social care, there still exists a wage gap. Because what there's a notion that the work that women do should be placed on a lower value than work done by men. So because of this misconception, like despite the increase in like the labor force participation among women, the wage gap persists. And again, also due to the pandemic, there has been a huge number of layoffs and cutbacks, uh, lesser access to childcare, which is brought which has caused more women to be out of jobs and like employment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, women have definitely been hit really hard by the job losses during this time, which obviously just increases these economic struggles that the women face. And you mentioned the value of women's work and how it's seen in society, and that it tends to be valued less. Could you talk a little bit to that and how gender norms and some of those stereotypes kind of play into how women end up getting paid and why they get paid less overall?
Sure. So basically, like, getting paid unequally has several negative impacts, both economically and on women's health. And oftentimes, like these negative impacts are risk factors for intimate partner violence. And there's like, because there's so much inequality at the starting level, there's so much biasness, there's lesser transparency. Pay inequity sort of fosters conditions of unequal power distribution, unequal access to economic opportunities, financial instability, even like housing insecurity, and basically like perpetuates these structural harmful gender norms, which increases a women's like likelihood of experiencing IPV and different kinds of abuse. And I can like give an example. So basically, like if pay equity is achieved, half of the working like women in United States would be raised out of poverty. And poverty is a risk factor of various different things like IPV. And basically, like if we achieve pay equity, not only will this reduce the rates of women in poverty, this will also help reduce other risk factors like intimate partner violence, or lesser access to economic opportunities. Oh, I think you're muted, Lauren.
Sorry about that. Let's dive into that now that we brought it up, is that connection that there is between pay equity, the gender wage gap, and intimate partner violence, domestic violence. So what the report essentially says is that the lack of pay equity, the gender wage gap, leads to risk factors of domestic violence. So it causes women to experience things like you mentioned, poverty. And then that poverty is something that puts women at a greater risk for intimate partner violence. So let's dive into some of those other risk factors too, and how pay equity creates those, and then that leads to increased risks of intimate partner violence.
So yeah, like I mentioned, so pay inequity basically leads to, there's like a disparity in the earnings and wages of women compared to men. So women are more economically vulnerable, and lower income for all women basically means less money to support themselves or their families. There are often struggles for like fulfilling basic necessities like housing, education, even healthcare. And this long-term wage gap basically like puts women at the risk for experiencing intimate partner violence, because pay inequity decreases the likelihood of experiencing financial stability. And sometimes, like, if pay inequity is present, women have lesser like options and lesser choices. They might have to live in disadvantaged neighborhoods. They might have more exposure to community violence, and these all perpetuate intimate partner violence. And basically, pay inequity reduces the opportunities women get in their lifetime. They decrease the bargaining power of women in relationships, and thus increase their likelihood of experiencing different different types of violence.
Yeah, I think that it's important for us to be making that connection that is made in the report of money and financial stability, and how that relates to power that women hold in society, in their relationships, and that it puts them at a disadvantage point in terms of disempowerment and not having as much control over their own lives, which allows potential abusers to exert control over them. And really that power and control that abusers assert over their victims is, how they keep victims in situations that are bad for them, and not having the financial resources to leave an abusive relationship, not having the financial resources to get your own housing, to seek help, to have your own income outside of your abuser. Those are all issues that are compounded for women by not having equal opportunities in the workplace, not having equal pay, it being harder for women to even pay back their student loans, because women's student loans aren't any less than men's are, yet when they graduate from college, they are off the bat making less money than men, and therefore it's harder for them to pay back those student loans, which only compounds the fact that they're making less money because they're not able to pay back those loans. It's just there's a lot that goes into it, and it's really complex. And the report does a great job of breaking all of those things down and talking about how they all intersect. So I think it's also important for us to talk a little bit about the intersections of race and the gender wage gap. So Aishwarya, would you mind addressing that for us?
Sure. So I think I mentioned that women earn 82 cents for every dollar a man gets. And again, like that pay gap number is very different for women of color, because the pay gap is further widened for women of color because they have to face additional discrimination of racism. Which brings about like further social and financial hindrances. For example, like Black women earn 62 cents and Latinas earn 54 cents for every dollar paid to a white man. And women of basically like all major racial and ethnic groups earn less than men of the same group, and also earn less than white men. Like even in Pennsylvania, like Black women earn almost $17,000 less than an average white man, and Latinas earn like lesser than 22,000 than an average Pennsylvania white man. And there's like a pay gap of almost 20 to 30% between women of color and white men. And this wage gap particularly impacts millennial women of color graduating from college, because even though there are more women of color graduating from college, the impact of student loans or being offered like lesser starting salary just worsens the gender wage gap, because right from the starting of their career, they don't have that financial opportunity to build their wealth, and they make less in earned income. And even like I just wanted to bring the point of motherhood penalty, which is basically the cost a woman bears when she decides to like raise a child. And mothers in general are paid extremely less. They make like 71 cents for every dollar a white man makes. And this this inequality is even more for like women of color who are mothers. They hardly earn like 41 cents to 51 cents or, or in comparison to what a white person makes. And for them, this gender wage gap is really punishing, because they have to manage expenses of running their households. They might have to like choose between saving for emergency fund or putting food on the table or educating their children, because there's that hindrance of not being able to earn equally, and there's that hindrance of not getting those economic opportunities to build their own wealth.
Yeah, that motherhood penalty. There was one of the things in the report that actually really took me by surprise was the fact that not only are mothers paid less, and then mothers tend to be offered less advancement opportunities, but that the exact opposite effect happens for men when they have children. So when a woman has a child, becomes a mother, her pay and her work opportunities decrease. But when a man has children and is a father, their pay actually tends to go up, and their opportunities tend to increase. So I was just blown away by that. I assumed that it was just, the same for men, they didn't necessarily lose anything, but I didn't realize that they even gained something. So can you talk a little bit to that more?
Yeah. So basically, like, when comparing like equally qualified women candidates, women who are mothers, they it's sort of a trend that they're offered less starting salaries. They're seen as less competent, and they're also less likely to be recommended for hire. And like you said, the effect on fathers is completely opposite. They're viewed as more committed, and they're offered more higher pay when they enter fatherhood, in comparison to when a woman decides to have a child. It Yeah, they're offered like less economic opportunities.
Yeah, I just found that to be really interesting. And why would you think, or did you come across anything in your research that maybe explained why these attitudes exist, that mothers are less competent, and why fathers might be more competent, and why that is seen even more so for mothers of color? Like, did you come across any background as to where those attitudes might be coming from?
So again, just the notion that their work, the work a mother puts in their professional life, is seen as less valuable, or is seen as not at par with with for example, a man who's a father and is working for raising his family. Just the whole concept that a mother a mother will not put their 100%, or their work isn't as valuable as a father. Just that misconception that employers have, and just these harmful norms, these lead to such attitudes and such trends that causes these penalties for a mother, and then makes her get salary that is lesser, and not enough to sustain themselves or their families.
Yeah, and that's such a shame. And speaking of things that I found surprising in the report, one of the other things that surprised me was the rate at which the gap was closing used to be a much higher rate than it is now. In fact, it's almost stagnated over the past few years. And talk to us a little bit about the history of the gender wage gap. Why, for a while, were we making progress, and now that progress seems to have stagnated?
So yeah, and so basically, like, the concept of pay equity, or the fight for pay equity, has been there for almost 4 decades, and there have been so many laws passed. I think the first demonstration was back in 1883, where workers went on a strike for asking, like, demanding equal pay, fair laws. But basically, like, there have been like so many laws passed, and was the implementation of the Equal Pay Act, which was like more than 50 years ago. Still, women of every race, education, and experience earn less than their male counterparts. And the change has become so constant now that like it is being predicted that it may take another 40 to 50 years to reach pay equity. And this is again different for like every state to state. For Pennsylvania, it may take up to like 60 to 70 years. And it's even worse for women of color, because they won't what it's projected that they won't see pay equity until like next century. So the change has just like there's very, very less change, like 0.001, 0.002% change, which is causing the delay. And again, the fight for pay equity, just even if it's going on, there's so much delay that it's going to take like another 40 to 50 years to actually reach at par with men being like with women being paid equally to men.
Yeah, that's wild. I think I read that for Latina women that it was something like 2233 when they would finally reach pay equity, which just like that year blew my mind. Like that's so far away. Like we need to do something. We can't just keep going at the rate that we're going and hope that this issue resolves itself. So I want to ask one more question before we get to how we can get to resolving itself, and that is if you could just touch a little bit on how education affects the pay gap for women, or doesn't affect the pay gap for women.
So yeah, so the pay gap starts right out of college. Like when I was doing this research, it was very surprising to see that men are more likely to be employed right out of their first year of college. And even if women are employed, they make less, they get less income. And also like more women than men take student loans. So a chunk of their salary goes into paying that student loans and the interest rate that comes with it. So they're getting lesser and lesser like pay. And what was like very surprising to me is that even when women get advanced degrees or climb up the educational ladder, the pay gap still increases. And I'll give you an example. So basically, like women who earn who get their master's degree, they earn only 72 cents for every dollar a man makes, irrespective of whether the man has a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. The wage gap still exists even if like women are climbing the educational ladder. So that was surprising to me when I was conducting the research.
So sorry, you mean, so if say there's a man and a woman at the same company that have the same job title, and that woman has a master's degree and the man only has a bachelor's degree, she's still likely to only get paid 72 cents to the dollar that he does, even though she has a higher educational attainment?
Yep.
Wow. Wow. I don't even know. That's just wild to me, because when you dive into how extensive the pay gap actually is, it's just so prevalent in every aspect of women in the workforce. But I don't want it to sound all doom and gloom. There are some things, some recommendations that you make for how we can work to reduce the gap and achieve pay equity. So tell us a little bit about what some of those things are that we can address to help make a difference in this.
Sure. And I mean, like this is not going to be an easy road, and there are definitely various steps that can be taken or need to be taken. And I think like just starting from like local level changes, organizational evaluation, advocating for equal pay for equal work, raising the living wage, even just expanding access to paid leave and childcare, and employers bringing in transparency in hiring as well as like salary disclosures can be some of the ways to help narrow the wage gap. And even on an individual level, if we're aware of the laws and trends in regards to equal pay, if we evaluate our position in our company, if we discuss pay with coworkers, and basically like maintain a transparency when it comes to salary negotiation and salary disclosure, this can be a starting step. And overall, it just requires like collaboration, not only between like the stakeholders and the change makers, but also like everyday men and women, and basically anyone who's willing to join the fight for pay equity. And I think this will, if we're all working together, this there's a higher chances of seeing pay equity in this lifetime rather than waiting for the next 100 years or so.
That would be great. Not having to wait until 2020, 22, 30, 34 Latina women would be wonderful. Yeah, I think that your message of working together and meeting people from across the spectrum to come together to make this a reality is important. And so some of the things that the report mentions are different potential policy options, but there are some other things that even companies can do themselves. Things like not asking applicants for their prior salary. If women start out being paid less and then they go to apply for a new job, the new job wants to know what they were paid at the last job. You know, is their new salary going to be based on what that work is actually worth, or is it going to be based on what somebody else valued their previous work on? So, you know, there's even things like that individual companies and employers can take on to do it at an individual level. But, you know, I think that we do need, in order for us to make a dent, we need some things to change on a bigger societal level. One of those things that you talk about is paid medical leave. And then you also mention Medicare and Medicaid. So obviously, caring for family and health insurance and healthcare has a big impact on pay equity. Can you talk a little bit about how those things are connected?
Sure. So currently, like the United States government does not provide any guarantee of paid paternal or paid parental, family, or like medical leave. But you know, if paid medical leave is put in place, it not only like helps, it provides like more equitable opportunities. It also addresses like various risk factors, like the unequal distribution of power and resources, or you know, there's the lack of like wealth or economic policies. And I think for paid leave policies to be well designed and inclusive, there needs to be like certain inclusions. It should be like gender and race inclusive. It should be like sustainably funded and also like cost effective for both the employers, the employees, as well as the government. And you know, it should protect employees against the consequences of taking leave. And basically like it should be rolled out in such a way that it covers the needs of employees throughout their like lifetime. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Another thing that you mentioned in potential action steps relates back to comparable worth that we discussed earlier. Can you talk a little bit about how addressing the issue of comparable worth could help us achieve pay equity?
Sure. So I think I mentioned like comparable worth basically is the principle that men and women should be compensated equally for equal or comparable work. And these like jobs that can come under comparable worth are based on the effort, the skills, and the responsibilities required for the job. And you know, comparable worth basically suggests that equal pay across gender fail to address the historic wage gap across occupations. So comparable worth can basically elevate the wages of women who are found to be underpaid, because through comparable worth, you will be evaluating your position in the company. You will be evaluating what you know, somebody in a similar role is making. So it basically levels the playing field, and it basically brings you at par with someone who's getting paid more and working at a similar kind of job.
Great. Thanks, Aishwarya. So there's some other additional potential action steps that Aishwarya talks about in great detail in the report. I do encourage everyone to take a look at it and see what she recommends for where we can go from here to start making a bigger dent in the gender wage gap. And I just wanted to wrap up by throwing out a couple of numbers for everyone to consider. And that's that pay equity costs women more than $915 billion every year. And that is just a staggering amount. In addition to that, victims of intimate partner violence lose a total of 8 million days of paid work each year, which is the equivalent of 32,000 full-time jobs. And that loss of days is due to the abuse that they have. So in addition to already being subject to the gender wage gap, victims of intimate partner violence often have other things impacting their economic potential. And so it can be compounded for those individuals. And then the connection between the two is, obvious and clear, as Aishwarya has laid out in this report for us. So, at PCADV, we do think it's really important to address this issue of pay equity for all women, but also to reduce and prevent intimate partner violence. And I want to open it up now to any questions that we might have from our audience out there. If there's anything else that you'd like to ask Aishwarya about pay equity and closing the gender wage gap. All right. Are there any differences between the gender wage gap nationally and in Pennsylvania specifically?
So Pennsylvania and the national trend is sort of at par with each other. In 2009, Pennsylvania was actually worse because women were making like 79 cents to every dollar, and the national average was 80 cents. But now, like after 2 years, basically the average of the national trend as well as Pennsylvania has become at par, and in both places it's 82 cents for every dollar a man is making.
Are there any benefits to achieving pay equity for the economy as a whole, not just for women themselves, but overall like economic welfare?
Sure. I mean, a pay equity costs the economy more than like $915 billion every year. So obviously closing that will help the economy, but also on an average, if the annual wage gap is closed, there's more like women will have like more than 13 months of additional childcare. They'll have enough money to pay off student loan in just 3 years. They'll have more than like 10 additional months of rent, and I think food for almost 1 year's worth. So yeah, it's not only going to help them, but also like help the economy, because pay equity will provide them financial opportunities, not only for themselves, but also for their family by bringing in more like economic stability.
Great. Yeah, it does seem like there's not really much downside. Awesome. Well, that is our questions for today. So Aishwarya, do you have any closing final thoughts for us on pay equity to end today?
Nothing, just thank you for having me, and I hope everyone reads the report and likes it. And yeah, that's
Great.
all.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. And for anybody who is interested in reading a report, there's going to be a link in the comments here on Facebook. So go ahead and check that out, share it, and we hope that you find it as informative and motivating as we did. Thanks. Have a great day, everybody.